Today we'll be exploring the older versions of Project Zomboid, starting with the very first version released on Steam 11 years ago. We'll look at the visual and technical improvements developers introduce each year, covering the journey from 2013 up to today. This will be a deep dive into 11 years of updates. I won't be covering each update individually, as there have been a total of 365 updates since the game has been released on November 8, 2013. Instead, we'll begin with the initial Steam version and then move on to versions released about a year later. Come with me on this journey through time as we explore the evolution of Project Zomboid. I can't promise we won't get lost along the way, but one thing is for sure. We'll be uncovering the past, one update at a time. Join me as we dive into 11 years of changes, improvements, and survival. Hello and welcome to this video. I'm Pixelated Quest, and if you like this video, please consider subscribing to my channel or leaving a like or a comment. Now let's begin. You might know Project Zomboid looking like this, but the game didn't always look or play the way it does today. In fact, it started off as something very different. To truly appreciate the commitment of the developers, it is important to look at how much the game has evolved over the years, introducing new mechanics, features, and updates. And let's not forget, a major update B42 is currently in the works. It was expected to be released by the end of 2024, though I'm not sure if that will happen. However, one thing is certain. It will happen at some point. The developers behind Project Zomboid are a prime example of how to nurture both a product and a community that is absolutely in love with their game. Okay, let's start with the first game version released 11 years ago on November 8, 2013. This version was officially titled 17.0011. The first thing you'll notice is the early access note, which basically says that the game is currently in active development and that the game should be played on 30 FPS. So one of the biggest issues with this early version was the frame rate. As noted in the message, the developers even recommend limiting the game to 30 FPS for better performance. I followed these instructions, but as you will see, it didn't make much of a difference. Despite its rough start, this version already featured the now iconic music and the title screen. There was even a mods tab, but aside from showcasing a nice cover image for the game, it didn't seem to do much else. Initially there were 3 game modes: Survival, Sandbox, and Last Stand. For this journey, we'll mainly focus on Survival and Last Stand, loading them up in each version to observe the progress made compared to the previous iteration. Let's start with Survival mode. Upon loading, we're greeted by the Spiffle Survival Guide, which interestingly is still present in today's version of the game. The UI, however, looks quite different. For example, there's no map, and a timer is prominently displayed, something you won't see in the current version unless your character is wearing a watch. As for the visuals, the character models look vastly different from what we have today. They feel much more grainy and less refined by comparison. You might not notice right away, but it's currently raining in the game. This is what rain looked like in the release version, quite basic compared to today. Another noticeable aspect is the personal UI indicator. Back then we only had 3: Info, Skills, and Health. The information displayed in these tabs was also much more limited than what we find in today's version. Now, because of the performance issues in this version, the game felt heavy and sluggish. Adding to that was the character running animation. It looked like they were putting in a lot of effort but barely moving. It's the same feeling as those dreams where you're running at full speed but getting nowhere. These performance issues only worsened as we progressed through this build. As the lagging issue started to take control, the gameplay became increasingly unresponsive and eventually the game crashed. The map in this version was also extremely small compared to what we have today. Additionally, many of the items we now associate with survival gameplay simply didn't exist at the time. Despite this, the core survival mechanics were already present, even if they were in a very early and unpolished state. Looking at the Last Stand game mode, weapons were already available for players to defend themselves. In terms of character animation, the game used a simple sprite system, which made the character movement and rotation feel very static. Combat was quite similar to what we have today, zombies relentlessly hunting you as you were fresh meat. The lighting system wasn't ideal by today's standards, but it worked reasonably well for its time. Ultimately, no matter how hard you tried, Last Stand always ended up the same way, with your inevitable death. And with that, we conclude our first look at the very first Steam version of Project Zomboid. Now we jump to a year later, with a game version released on November 17, 2014. Starting up this version, we already see a different intro screen. The mod section is still empty, though it seems the developers have been working on this feature over the past year. This version also includes a basic multiplayer mode, but it reportedly didn't work well. Jumping straight into survival mode, I noticed that the save I created in the version released a year prior is no longer supported. This means I had to start a new survival character. This incompatibility between older save games and newer versions became a recurring theme in Project Zomboid. 2 new maps, Muldra and West Point, were introduced. The character creation system is somewhat similar to the previous version, but this time it includes traits, which are new to this update. Playing this version feels much different from the initial release. The performance issues that caused lag and crashes in the earlier version have been addressed and fixed. The game already feels quite polished at this point, although many items, storage spaces, climate system and the crafting system are still not present. Animations and running speed have also been improved, making movement and running feel much smoother now. Now let's hop over to the Last Stand game mode. To be honest, this mode feels somewhat similar to the previous version, although I noticed improvements. For example, character rotations are no longer sprite-based. Instead, it appears that a fixed game object is used to rotate around its axis, making the rotation feel much smoother. However, there seems to be some kind of image artifact stuck to the character, which rotates along with it. You can see it here. Shooting mechanics feel very direct with hardly any misses, and it's quite satisfying. But as always, no matter how hard you try in Last Stand, you eventually meet your demise, and here is mine. Moving on to the version released a year later, specifically on September 16, 2015. The intro screen is slightly different from the previous version, with a redesigned logo. The main menu now features a workshop and a tutorial option. I decided to try the tutorial first. The UI has been redone over the past year. Skills have now more depth, crafting has been added, and several other features have been introduced. What stands out in this tutorial is that the Last Stand game mode is no longer available in the main menu. Instead, the tutorial utilizes the Last Stand game mode with added explanations to guide new players. However, surviving beyond the explanation is impossible in this tutorial/Last Stand hybrid mode. You can see for yourself. Back in the main menu, I choose the solo game mode. Here, we now have 4 different options: First Bite, Custom Sandbox, Survival and Challenge, each with its own characteristics. We can also see that the traits and occupation system have been expanded, featuring new occupations and additional traits. At this point, the game already feels and plays much closer to the version you can play today. Crafting has been added, house alarm systems can now be triggered, new storage spaces are available, and a host of other features have been introduced, including an improved lighting system. But most importantly, you can now climb through windows. And with that, we summed up this version of the game. Moving on to the game version released a year later, on December 16, 2016. One notable addition to the main menu is a loading system for individual save games. Previously, you could only continue a single ongoing game, which made the experience much more challenging. Now players can manage multiple save files, adding convenience to gameplay. Another significant update is the ability to host or join multiplayer games. Additionally, mods are now fully integrated into the game, providing more customization options for players. The solo game mode has also been reworked. It now includes a scenario option with different starting conditions: initial infection, the first week, 6 months later, and survival. More challenges were also introduced in this version, including You Have One Day, opening hours, Winter is Coming, House in the Woods Last Stand, House in the Woods Last Stand Accumulator, a really seedy DA, which stands for Cataclysm Dark Days Ahead. The Last Stand game mode was reintroduced in this version. As we saw in the previous version, it was only available as part of the tutorial and not as a selectable game mode. For this version, I'll start by exploring Last Stand again. The ambience music has been redone in this version, along with the improved sound effects. The shooting and aiming system also caught me off guard. It feels quite different now. The gameplay feels much quicker and smoother compared to the previous version. However, despite these improvements, Last Stand remains unsurvivable. Next, I tried the survival mode on hardcore difficulty. This version introduces a new map called Rosewood. The character customization, along with the occupation and trade system, remains the same as in the previous version. However, items now provide additional buffs and debuffs, along with expanded descriptions. By the way, has anyone seen the cold pack item in the current version of the game? I don't recall encountering it anymore. Let me know in the comments if it's still around. In this version, the UI no longer displays a clock. Now, the only way to tell the time is by finding a watch and wearing it, just like in the 2024 version of the game. I was curious about how far the map extended, since this is the first version that introduced the map as we know today, but with much less content. So I decided to make my way to my base that I usually inhabit. For reference, my go-to base is located here. If you watched my previous video on Project Zomboid from a few months ago, you'll know that I often use this house as my primary base. Since this version does not include cars yet, I had to travel to the location by foot. It took a while, but when I arrived, I noticed that the house and the neighborhood I call home in the current version didn't exist back in 2016. Everything in the area was empty. If you look at the right side of the screen, you can see how the same location looks today. And that's about it for this version. Now let's jump ahead another year and see if my favorite house has finally made it into the game. We're now playing the version that was released on 22nd November 2017. The main menu and the intro are the same as they were a year before, but that doesn't mean that the game itself is unchanged. I start by continuing my game from where I left off a year ago. Since this save doesn't conflict with the game's logic, I'm able to load it without any issues. The only thing I notice is a message on screen saying, "Converting world to new version." This may take some time during the first load of an old save. It does take a little time, but eventually the save file loads up successfully. Once in the game, I immediately head to the location of my house, only to discover that it's still not in the game, even though this is the late 2017 version. Other than that, the game feels and plays pretty much the same as it did a year ago. Next, I tried the Last Stand game mode. Back in the main menu, I see that the game modes haven't changed. Everything here feels the same as a year ago. Here's a comparison with the game version from the previous year. And as usual, the Last Stand game mode kills you no matter what approach you take. Starting up the version from 22nd November 2018, exactly 1 year from the previous version, the intro is the same, but this time we're greeted with a very detailed changelog outlining the updates in this version. The main menu layout is slightly different, and it's something you're likely familiar with if you played Project Zomboid before, as this is the layout used in the current version as well. I tried to load the save from a year ago to see if my house has finally been built in this version, but the game says that I cannot load this save. That means I'll need to revisit the location of my house, but I'll do that in a bit. First, let's check out the new game options and play the Last Stand game mode. Here we can see that the scenarios have been reworked. There are now only 2, and 2 new challenges have been added to the game: A Storm is Coming and Descending Fog. I hop into the Last Stand game mode and I'm greeted with this pop-up. So the game now has a seasons and weather system, something that was not in the game a year ago. Additionally, the skill system has also been reworked in this version. Other than that, the gameplay is quite similar to the previous version, with improvements in the lighting and shadow systems. But as usual, the Last Stand game mode claims another victim. Next, I tried a survival game mode. Immediately, I can see the effects of the weather and season system that was introduced. The vegetation is clearly in remission due to it being winter. Another important addition is the cars now available in this version. Additionally, micromanagement has been expanded and features like radios now include device options. But in the midst of writing this script and playing the game, I forgot to check if my house has been built yet. Well, I guess we'll find that out in the next game version. Now we're playing the version released on December 10th, 2019. Upon entering the main menu, we are greeted with a different type of pop-up this time, notifying us that we're playing a public beta version of the game. It also mentions that some features might be disabled due to ongoing improvements and optimizations. Looking at the game modes available in this version, we see that they have remained largely the same, but have been renamed under the playstyle category, with the addition of a new option called Builder, which is essentially a creative mode. Additionally, King's Mouth and Studio challenges were introduced to the game. I start by trying the Last Stand game mode again. As in the previous version, we are greeted with a pop-up outlining recent improvements. This time, new systems like crouching, sprinting, auto-climbing, and similar features have been added. Another noticeable difference is the character itself. Now we start almost naked when entering this game mode. Here we also see the introduction of protection and temperature stats for the character. Aside from the graphical improvements and new stat systems, the gameplay remains the same as before. As in previous versions, we inevitably die in this game mode. Back in the main menu, in survival mode, we can see that the map Riverside has been added to the game. This means that my house should now be in the game, unlike in previous versions. So I set out to confirm that it is there. After finding keys to a police car, I make my way to the location. However, after a while, the car runs out of fuel, which happens here, and it becomes unsteerable, leading to a crash. Regardless, I managed to drag myself, injured with a broken bone and a deep wound on my foot, back to my house. As you can see, this location is now present in the game as of the 2019 version, though it looks a bit different from how it appears in the current 2024 version. Here's a comparison between both the 2019 and 2024 version. With that, my house is finally built and we can move on to the next game version. This is now the game version from 22nd December 2020. Technically, this is the game version 41.69 and is a year older than the previous one we played. The game feels somewhat similar to the previous game version all the way up to the version we have today, and this is mainly because the developers are working on version B42, as said at the beginning of this video. But nevertheless, I went and tried the Last Stand game mode again here. Here also, everything is pretty much the same. We are still almost naked when starting this game mode, with the difference that there are now magazines in the game, and the crate in the house has a gravel bag. Not really sure what for, as the game mode usually lasts a couple of minutes before you eventually get ripped into pieces by waves of zombie hordes. The survival mode plays and feels almost identical to the version today, with minimal differences being in stats and item perks. Other than that, you could be playing the version from 2020 today and not find many differences in them, let alone miss something. I'm going to skip over the versions from 2021 to 2023 and jump straight into the version 2024. One major difference in this version of the intro is that we are now greeted by a terms and conditions pop-up. After jumping into the Last Stand game mode, I'm immediately surprised to find my character is no longer naked, as she had been for the past 3 or 4 years. However, despite the clothes we now have, we still inevitably die in this game mode. As for survival mode, it hasn't seen any major improvements since 2020. But if you've been following this video and have seen my previous Project Zomboid video, you'll recognize my house. While it may not have been part of the game until 2019, I'm definitely happy to see it in this version. And that concludes this video. We've journeyed from the initial game version released in late 2013 all the way up to 2024, witnessing major updates and events that have shaped the game into what it is today. A true masterpiece and a symbol of dedication from a group of developers who have put immense care and passion into their work and products. If you'd like to watch my other Project Zomboid video, which I highly recommend, you can click on it now and give it a watch as well. Congratulations to the winners of this giveaway, listed here. Send me an email to claim your Steam key. If you also want to participate in the next giveaway, which will be in the next video I release, simply subscribe to my channel. I will be picking 5 random subscribers with each video releasing. Thank you for watching this video, and if you enjoyed, please consider subscribing to my channel and leaving a like or a comment. This would help me make more such videos and grow my channel. Have a wonderful day.